Testing, testing. Okay,
Okay, stay away
we're
from
good.
the speakers. Go around this way and sit in front right now.
Okay. I do.
Do a test. Test one,
No, I'm
two.
good.
Check, checkers, chess,
Yeah.
checkmate, wheat checks,
we good?
rice checks, lots of checks.
Oh,
All right. Hi, guys.
Got it.
We're going to start in just a few minutes. We got about 3 minutes before we get going. And, are we good? We got more people coming in? Okay, perfect. Well, then, if that's the case, if we're waiting for a few more people, then I guess we have to sing happy birthday to Celeste and to Mitzi. Get over here. Get up here. Get up here. Will you see the little happy birthday stuff we have? And you guys know who Mitzi is. You guys know who Celeste is. You got two of the best emergency preparedness experts in the world right here. You got 20, 30 years of doing it. You've got one of the top of Utah's horticulturists.
Close.
So close. Darn it. I'll keep working on it. But anyways, all the degrees she has, she taught at the college level, everything else. You got some of the best here, and they do this as a labor of love. They're here every day to serve you guys. Typically, when you come into a store like this, you get a bunch of young people who don't know what they're talking about. You got master level professionals here serving you guys every single day for free, basically. And so I want you guys to give them a big, big hand and happy birthday. You ready? Okay. And here goes. Happy birthday to you. And we'll say Celeste and Mitzi.
Happy
Birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Celeste and Mitzi. Happy birthday to you. Any words?
Thank you.
Anything?
You guys are awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys, for everything you do. Okay.
happy birthday.
All right. So let's see what time it is. I think we're about to get started. And 6:29. Awesome. So we want to leave as much time for David as possible. Can you check online and let's do one more check just to make sure people can hear me and see me. Anybody who's online, can you give me one more thumbs up on the little chat? And Celeste, can you tell me if they can hear me and see me? Because we've had some problems with Zoom for the last two classes. I think we've fixed those problems. We just want to make sure before we get started. Are we getting a thumbs up from people? Are we getting a yes? Yes, awesome. Yay! We are good to go. So just to give you guys a little heads up on what is happening, we got another class coming up February 6th, I believe. It's a Tuesday. And that class is going to be pretty awesome. Do you guys, is that you? Okay. Sorry. But anyways, we're going to be talking about, if you guys know our good friend Jim, who just died this last week, very, very sad. And anyways, you can't, but I'm coming back. Just to let you know, Jim is the one who came up with the idea of open cell foam for clothes and for sleeping bags and everything else. And this is I was trying to figure out how in the world, if I were in a situation where I need to take a 72-hour kit and go right into the wilderness and it's negative 20 degrees, I'm not going to be able to bring everything if I need to walk away. Well, the chances of that happening are just like 1 in a million, right? Because usually you're going to stay at home, go to a church, go to a friend's house. You're going to find some other way, but there's that one chance, right? And so I've been trying to figure out, how do I do this? I'm refilming the Thrivalist course. If you guys get on there right now, you're going to see the first 4 videos in the introduction. It's turning out pretty good, but it took me about 3,000 hours last time, trying to keep it literally under 1,000 hours this time, hopefully. And we're putting all that together, but I'm trying to teach all this stuff that I've learned over the last 6-7 years since I did the last one. And every single year I put in thousands and thousands of hours. So I've just learned so much more. So I'm going to be updating the course over the next couple of months. So you're going to see amazing content in there. But one of the things I was stuck on is I was trying to figure out, how do I do that? Because, with a family and everything else, I can't just put on this big thing with, all this sleeping bag stuff and everything and walk for miles. And then it dawned on me, and usually I get these little inspirations right before I wake up in the morning because I've been thinking about it all night and while asleep, and it just popped on me. It's not about the tent. It's not about the sleeping bag. It's about the clothes. And it just like, why didn't I think of that before? I mean, all these years, 13 years professionally, I didn't think of that. That next to my little 72 kid, 96-hour kid, whatever you want to call it, next to my bug out bag, I have my clothes. And if I ever needed to leave the house, if I did, I grab my clothes, walk outside the garage, put my clothes on. And then I'm good to go, right? In the middle of the winter. So I was like, now what type of clothes? And I've been testing out foam sleeping bags to see how they work. And I went sleeping in the middle of the over by Delta, and it was freezing. And all my friends had their mummy bags, and they were supposed to be all warm and everything like that. They woke up in the morning and they're like, my feet are freezing. They were like all freezing, and I was like, that's crazy. I'm burning perfectly warm. I mean, it's just with no socks on in my underwear. Basically, my kids are in one of these, and the open cell foam works. And so what I've been doing is I've been testing out different ways of doing it. And I got down to about 16 to 20 degrees and went outside and slept in the middle of nothing. And I found the holes. And I figured I slept for an hour and a half perfectly warm. Usually you can go about 15 minutes before your feet start getting cold. Hour and a half. And then I found, oh, there's the hole I need to fix. So I'm waiting for it to get cold enough. And then Logan is supposed to get cold this Friday. So that's my sleep night. And I think I got it. I'm like 99.9% sure I figured it out. Okay. Where I literally can sleep outside in negative 20 degrees and be totally warm all night. And if you don't have good sleep, you get sick and everything else during an emergency. So that's super important. Now, the reason I bring all this up is because February 6th, we're going to talk about this exact topic. And I'm going to be able to tell you my tests. And I'm having the owner. So this is an open cell foam coat. Okay. And literally it breathes. And you literally can get it soaking wet, put it on, and literally in about 30 to 45 seconds, you're warm again with it completely wet. Okay. And so we're actually going to be going into the science of this on February 6th. I'll tell you what's happening. And I've asked the owner of the company to come in, and he's going to bring a bunch of them. We got some of them over there to show you some of the stuff he's going to be bringing. He's going to bring a whole bunch more. So if any friends, family, and all that stuff come, he's supposed to be giving us a better discount for that night. So anybody who's interested, show up that night, whatever he decides. So that's what's happening, okay? So another thing is we've got David Pine here tonight. You guys have heard David before? Isn't that awesome? Isn't he so cool? Yeah. And David, he has a resume literally about a mile long. And I'm going to read the first paragraph of his resume. I'll let you brag about yourself a little bit more when you get started. But David Pine currently serves as the Deputy Director for the National Operations for the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security, and as the Vice President for the Association of the United States Army's Utah chapter, and as a West Valley City Police Honorary Colonel. And that just is one paragraph of a whole bunch of paragraphs. So that's who we have here tonight. And he's going to be talking about war. And you guys know that in the middle, we're at the beginning of what's, I think, the worst wars that are going to be coming. And I think we're starting that with Ukraine and with Russia, you know, what's heating up between China and Thailand. North Korea is always there. And then with Iran and, you know, with the Hamas stuff, with you know, Israel. I think if anybody's a little tiny bit religious and have read a couple scriptures, you know that it's supposed to get pretty bad. Like really bad. So this is a very timely topic that he's going to be talking on, and that's warfare. That's war. And what's interesting is this: as soon as you start bringing up war, people associate it with politics. Okay? Because I love Russia or hate Russia, or I love Ukraine, I hate Ukraine. You know, the Ukrainian people are awesome, but their leader is corrupt. Russia, you know, the people are good, but the leader's corrupt. You know, you have so many opinions. And the funny thing about it is the opinions about Israel, Hamas. I just talked to an Israeli lady to listen to her side, and I want to hear the other side. And I watch CNN, I watch Fox. I watch everything I can, all the crazy conspiracy theories. I listen to everything because I'm okay with it. But some people get tied up emotionally. And it has nothing to do with the speaker. It has to do everything with you. You know, if you get offended. But if you take this and say, well, let me listen to his opinion, even if I don't agree with it. And if I do, I'd like to learn more. If you go in like that, you'll learn so much more. And it'll become so much more meaningful to you. And just let me put in one little more point before I bring him up here. Most people get swayed by the media. Okay? when early 2000s, and I was living in the United States, visiting my dad every 2 years. He lived in Greece. I was watching CNN in the United States, and they said the war on terrorism. We need to get into Iraq. We need to take everyone down, which made no sense, by the way. Iraq never attacked us. Okay, but we need to go out there and stop the war on terror. I went to Greece, turned on the TV in English, watching the same CNN from the United States, and they were saying the opposite. And I'm going, oh my goodness, those little stinkers. They're creating division around the world. Because instead of saying we need to go attack the terrorists, they were saying, I don't understand, America, we shouldn't be in everybody else's countries. And they were causing division. And when you talk to the people in Europe, they said, yeah, America, you guys shouldn't be in everybody's countries. And in the United States, they're saying, yeah, we're fighting for terrorism. And so you see how many people get swayed by the media. So you got to break out of that, especially in a day of AI. Because pretty soon, if it hasn't already started happening to you, everything you Google is going to be seeded by AI to be able to change the way you think, right? So don't fall for it. That's what I'm saying. So let's go ahead and get started. I need everybody to silence your cell phones and everybody to get ready to learn a little bit and ask questions at the end. And let's welcome David up.
You have a clicker? Okay, thanks. Well, thank you so much for coming out to hear me today. It's wonderful to be with a group, such a great group of patriots, lovers of freedom, lovers of our God-given Constitution, our constitutional republic. So, as was said, my name's David Pine. I actually got promoted recently to Executive Vice President of the Task Force on National Homeland Security, which is very recent. And the bio that Marcelo just read was a little dated. But pretty accurate. I'm no longer a vice president of AUSA Utah. Everything else was correct, but I want to thank Marcelo again and the team here at Food Storage Depot for hosting this event. They're really wonderful and trying to have this great business that to help us protect ourselves against what's coming. Let's see. I'm not getting the next screen here. May have to just do that. So these are a few of. Okay, there we go. Wasn't working before. I think there was something up. I served as a U.S. Army headquarters staff officer way back in 2000, 2003, worked in D.C., and a bunch of government defense jobs for about 6 years. Served in the Army as a combat arms officer in the 90s. Didn't fight any wars. I'm chairman of the Utah Republican Veterans Caucus. I'd like to recognize this gentleman and any others who served in our military for all the selfless service that he and others have provided us. It is much appreciated. I'm also editor of the Real War newsletter, which is available at dpyne.substack.com. And I'll probably be posting a kind of a summary of this presentation shortly, as well as the peace plan I have for to end the Gaza-Israel war. And I'm co-author of a new book called Catastrophe Now: America's Last Chance to Prevent an EMP Disaster, as well as a book about our nuclear arsenal that's coming up. So this map, I think, strikes home. We have a military, and the job of the military is to defend the United States of America. But what are we doing? We're defending every country but the U.S. We have 10 million illegals that have crossed our borders in the last 3 years, including 100,000 Chinese nationals that are military-age men that could be PLA special forces, saboteurs, assassins, really as an advanced vanguard of a potential Chinese invasion. And we're trying to spend all our money to defend Ukraine. Israel can defend itself, so I think we're good on that one, but a lot of wasted money in Ukraine for a war that Biden chose that we didn't have to fight. So there's 4 different competing schools of foreign policy thought. Let me move this back in case I'm blocking this for anyone. Neoconservatives, of course, they never met a war that they didn't like. Nikki Haley, as a good example of someone like that, trying to oppose our great former President Trump. Support fighting other countries' wars and defending their borders against invasion, but not our own. Liberal internationalists like Joe Biden, who are essentially globalists, what I call America last politicians, people that believe that NATO is the be-all end-all of U.S. national security, even though it really doesn't serve a purpose anymore. We probably shouldn't be part of that. It merely serves to provoke Russia to attack us. And they have this kind of unholy alliance, neoconservative Republicans and liberal internationalist Democrats. People like Nikki Haley, Joe Biden, they agree on almost everything, almost all foreign policy issues and war issues, and they're disastrously wrong. And they're risking a lot of American lives. We hope it doesn't come to that, but particularly if China invades Taiwan, that could really pose a threat to us. So there's a fundamental misunderstanding about Russia and China, which is that if we don't fight them along their borders, they'll come fight us here at home. And in fact, the truth is the exact opposite. If we didn't send U.S. troops to be based and stationed along their borders, they wouldn't have a reason to attack us. And in fact, they never would attack us militarily. So the entire, all of our tensions with Russia and China at this point, major tensions, risks of military confrontation, are because we're, each superpower are exerting what I call opposing spheres of alliance, conflicting spheres of influence, rather. So every nuclear superpower has a sphere of influence, as I'll describe later in the presentation. And we're trying to push into their spheres of influence right along their borders, particularly against Russia and Ukraine. And that poses a major threat because Russia has a lot more nuclear weapons than we do. They have super EMP weapons that could destroy us in a matter of minutes in terms of shutting down our country. Cyber weapons. China even has biological weapons, including a lab that was discovered in California recently. So then there's the realists. So realists include America First conservatives like Donald Trump, Rand Paul, Tulsi Gabbard, folks like that. Support like a grand strategy of retrenchment, offshore balancing, only defending our treaty allies in Europe, not Ukraine, not Taiwan, countries that we have never or no longer have security commitments to. All of our Cold War presidents from Truman to Reagan were foreign policy realists, and that's why we were able to win the Cold War. We had some of the crazy nutcases like Biden as president. I think we would have had a nuclear war and the U.S. might not exist right now. President Kennedy was he was a great example of a Cold War realist. He helped kind of dial down and resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis with the diplomatic peace agreement, in which we gave a little bit more to the Soviets and they gave to us, but it prevented a nuclear conflict that could have killed, in his estimation, about 100 million Americans. So that's the kind of vision that we need today. That's the kind of vision that President Trump, I think, would bring if he were to be reelected president. He's famous for saying that he loves to cut deals. He said we need to shut down the war in Ukraine. That he would lead a U.S. delegation to negotiate an end to the war. And that war in particular is a very easy war to end, as I'll discuss later. So implementation of a realist foreign policy would serve to greatly decrease conflicts in the world or end them, prevent them from happening in the first place. It would also make us much more safe and secure. So President Reagan, one of my favorite presidents, he had a great quote, and he said, "The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant, it's just that they know so much that isn't so." So that's the way, I think that quote applies to people like Nikki Haley and Lindsey Graham as well. You know, folks that think they understand all the lessons of history, they have all the answers, but yet all they want to do is, fight new Vietnams, fight new Iraq wars, fight Russia and Ukraine. They think we can bully other countries around, like Russia and China, that have massive nuclear arsenals, and that they won't respond in kind, and that's just not true. So neoconservatives use a lot of fake history lessons. misconceptions and myths about a war to kind of justify their current wars. And one of the biggest ones is about World War II, and what I call the big neoconservative lie, which is that World War II was caused by the British policy of appeasing Germany with the Munich Agreement, when in fact it was the British abandonment of appeasement which sparked the war with the West. And I know that's a controversial view. We don't have a lot of time to go over that, but I do have a really good article on my Real War Substack that explains why that's the case. So the neoconservatives are always trying to say it's 1938. You know, we face a new Hitler, whether it's Saddam or Putin. Xi probably is accurate. I think Xi is a modern day Hitler. He's someone we have to really worry about. But Putin, I don't think is interested in war with the U.S. I think if China fights a war with the U.S., he'll probably join the war and kind of take his share of the spoils. But that's not his preference. So during World War II, you know, we allied with the evil Soviet Empire. Reagan rightly called the evil empire, and we helped expand communism while also liberating 7 Western countries from Nazi, dictatorship and totalitarian control. So it was kind of a mixed bag. But ultimately, between 1939 and 1949, communist control in the world increased by over 4 times, 430%, from 170 million people to 730 million, following the fall of China. All of that was avoidable. We didn't have to compromise any of that. But one thing so the Alta Appeasement Pact did do one good thing. It prevented World War III. You know, so neither country crossed into the other side's sphere of influence. And as a result, that agreement was honored by both sides for 54 years, and we averted World War III, and we got the Soviets to collapse. So I'll be talking a little bit more about how we could use a modern-day sphere of influence agreement to ensure peace today. So the U.S. is a republic, but it's also an empire. The U.S. became an empire way back in 1898 when it fought a war against the Spanish-American War and took over the Philippines and various other countries. But the problem with empires is they tend to be militaristic and, you know, invade or occupy other countries, and that leads to new conflicts. For example, Iraq and Syria, if we didn't have troops in Iraq and Syria, we wouldn't be attacked. We've been attacked 130 times. We've had troops there in Iraq for over 20 years. And what purpose are they serving? You know, I mean, the war's over, at least we've been told. So truth is the first casualty of war, as governments use war propaganda, and that's Western governments, totalitarian governments, you know, to support popular support for wars that would be very unpopular if the people knew the truth about them. And you know, the liberal mainstream media today, it's little more than an Orwellian propaganda arm that you know, essentially is spouts whatever the Biden regime says, whatever disinformation, to deceive the American people to support the establishment of a one-party police state here at home under the Democrats, and more disastrous and unnecessary wars abroad. Lastly, the U.S. strategy of liberal hegemony has served to greatly magnify threats to us. Certainly that's the case with Russia. Russia was not really a threat to us until the Ukraine war, because we opted, instead of to resolve the Ukraine war peacefully, to torpedo the peace deal that Ukraine and Russia had come to on March 31st of 2022, so in an effort to further weaken Russia militarily. And that's pushed Russia into a closer military alliance with China, which, the Sino-Russian military alliance poses a real, probably the most dangerous threat we've ever faced. So the record of U.S. military intervention overall it's all about creating new enemies. And it began with World War I. You know, U.S. military intervention, I'm something of an amateur military historian, especially the world wars. So if you see something controversial, you know, there's a lot of basis behind what I'm trying to say, but I welcome any questions, both, including differing opinions. At the end, we're going to try to reserve about 25 minutes at the end. So if someone could please let me know when it reaches 7:30, and I'll try to wrap things up. Thanks. So World War I, that led to U.S. intervention, led to the communist takeover of Russia, as well as the Treaty of Versailles, which led the Nazi takeover of Germany and the outbreak of World War II. And then, World War II, FDR wanted to get us involved in that war for good or for bad. And he very deliberately provoked a Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and was successful in getting us into that war. If we hadn't allied with the Soviets, I think it would have been a really great just war. It would have expanded freedom, but unfortunately, we chose to ally with the Soviets, which I think was unnecessary to defeat Hitler and expanded communism a lot. And every single other war, especially Iraq in 2003, I wouldn't say they're all unnecessary. I think the Korean War was a great decision to fight. Most of the other wars, I think, were avoidable. I mean, World War II was a just war. So was World War I. They were, wars fought in defense of another, but they caused far more greater security threats to the U.S. and our allies than they did help to resolve. So back in 2000, I was a Georgetown student with finishing up my master's in national security studies. And I predicted that the greatest existential challenge we would ever face would be from the Sino-Russian alliance during the 21st century. And just 7 months later, they signed a formal alliance agreement establishing the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is kind of a modern-day Warsaw Pact, as well as a treaty of friendship, which traditionally has been an alliance treaty between Russia and China. So one of the biggest mistakes that we made was both Presidents Bush massively disarmed us of our nuclear arsenal. That helped us win the Cold War and ensure peace and security. And as we've drawn down our nuclear forces by 90%. I've called for expanding our nuclear arsenal by four times. Probably never happen, but I think that's what we need to really have a robust deterrence of Russia and China, because our nuclear arsenal is getting a lot smaller and way too obsolescent. So there are a number of things in addition to reducing our nuclear arsenal unilaterally that I think were huge mistakes that we made after our Cold War victory that cost us to lose the post-Cold War peace. And one of those was Gorbachev, Putin, and Yeltsin all wanted to join NATO at some point. I think we should have welcomed Russia into NATO. We could have had them as an ally, a very powerful ally against China. Didn't have to be NATO. It could have been OSCE, some kind of collective security agreement to ensure that we didn't, all of our issues were resolved peacefully. That would have greatly expanded U.S. security. Granting most favored nation status to China and WTO membership has given them trillions of dollars to build up their military, engage in this massive nuclear buildup. So those were huge mistakes. Also failing to allow Germany, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan to have nuclear weapons. If we had given them a nuclear arsenal in the 90s when we were disarming of our nukes, I think we'd be a lot more secure. China might not want to invade a nuclear-armed Taiwan. And then, of course, refusing to negotiate peace with Russia before the war in Ukraine, when they offered a draft peace agreement to us. So this is the world as it exists today. In red, you see formal Shanghai Cooperation Organization members. Again, that's essentially the Sino-Russian alliance, the enemy alliance. So it's kind of Western Bloc, Eastern Bloc, much like the Cold War II. And then we have one sad fact is the only major country in the Western Hemisphere that is free or has a conservative or centrist government is Argentina. And that's very recent. All the other briefings I've done for the last year and a half, I've had to say that all major nations in the Western Hemisphere have been leftist, socialist, or communist controlled. Sadly, of course, we know we're kind of semi-socialist controlled right now under Biden. As you can see, I mean, we have a lot of allies, but our forces are very spread out, whereas the enemy alliance is very concentrated in kind of the heartland of Europe. So what we've had this grand strategy since 1992, the end of the Cold War. It's called liberal hegemony. And we kind of have what we call this liberal rules-based order. But it's something that we make exceptions to, but no one else is allowed to make exceptions to. So invading Iraq obviously had nothing to do with the liberal rules-based order that says you don't invade other countries unprovoked. That's, of course, Putin invaded Ukraine, and that was very lamentable. There were some justifications for invading, but we have to condemn it. It's a violation of international law. But it's something we can reverse through a peace agreement in large part. Bush, as I mentioned, used 9/11 as a pretext to launch a global war on terror when he should have focused like a laser on killing bin Laden, using special forces instead of invading and occupying countries for decades on end. Getting a lot of good troops killed rather. Over 7,000 U.S. troops died in the global war on terror, including 30,000 as well as 30,000 suicides. So that's a huge number of brave troops that sacrificed their lives for Bush's global war on terror. This strategy is proven disastrous for the U.S. For the reasons I stated, but also because it's created a lot more new enemies. So it's said that U.S. leaders, liberal U.S. leaders, are really our worst enemy because they have a history of creating new enemies. And if we didn't have those wars and policies, we might not have any enemies, any major enemies anyway. So this is kind of a timeline of the provocations we've had against Russia. As I mentioned, all three Russian leaders post-Soviet, Gorbachev and then Yeltsin and Putin all wanted to join NATO at some point, but were rebuffed. It started with Clinton bombing Yugoslavia in 1999 when I was in DC. And Putin, he actually wanted to join the EU. He also wanted to join NATO or have some kind of mutual security agreement, such as he offered in 2009, as well as December of 2021. So our old executive director, Dr. Peter Pry, he's a really great Russian nuclear weapons expert. He said that he read the draft security treaty that Russia presented to us in 2021. He said it was almost as favorable for the US as it was for Russia. And I agree with that assessment. Obviously, the big provocations were the Bucharest Declaration, where NATO said that Ukraine and Georgia would become NATO members, causing Russia to respond by invading Georgia, occupying 20% of Georgia. And then, of course, the Biden-authorized coup, CIA-backed coup that overthrew the democratically elected Ukrainian president back in 2014 that caused Russia to respond by annexing Crimea and supporting separatists in the Donbass region. And then if the actual thing that provoked the current war was a strategic partnership agreement that Biden signed with Ukraine. That happened in November of 2021. Russia responded by massing troops on Ukraine's border, and then he provided us with the draft security treaties, hoping that we would meet him halfway, or at least agree to some of those terms. Primarily, the one that was the kind of the pretext for invading, which was Ukraine not committing to never allow Ukraine to join NATO. And that was something we could have given at no cost. It's an open secret that Ukraine is never going to join NATO because there's 3 or 4 countries that are NATO members that don't want it to happen. So I mentioned this March 2022 agreement where Ukraine and Russia actually did sign kind of a preliminary peace agreement for Russian troops to withdraw from nearly all Russian-occupied territory. They actually started doing that. They withdrew from half of Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine in the first week of April. And then the US responded, and UK responded by viewing that as weakness, a sign of weakness. And so we kind of did a 180, and Biden went from supporting peace with Russia in end of February and early to mid-March to supporting endless war with proxy war with Russia and Ukraine. So he and Boris Johnson, former UK Prime Minister, torpedoed the peace agreement, and as a result, 500,000 Ukrainians are either dead or seriously wounded. So the sad fact, I guess, is that Russia has been winning its proxy war with NATO in Ukraine. Ukraine has been losing the war. We hear, despite the liberal propaganda we hear on mainstream media that Ukraine is winning, that's simply not the case. And it only takes a seventh grader looking at a map and seeing that Russia 35 times larger to know who's going to win that, plus the fact that they have nukes and Ukraine doesn't. So Putin didn't, a lot of people say, well, Putin didn't invade Ukraine because he was scared of Trump. It's actually the exact opposite. Putin didn't invade Ukraine because he didn't feel threatened by Trump, because he knew that Trump wanted good relations with Russia. So Putin only takes aggressive action, offensive action, when he feels threatened. Biden, again, with the Strategic Partnership Agreement making Ukraine a de facto NATO member, he felt very threatened by that, and he responded accordingly. I'm not trying to justify, Russian illegal aggression. I'm just stating the facts. So the war has proven to be an unmitigated geostrategic debacle for the West, because it's caused Russia to ally closer with our number one enemy, which is communist China, and that's the exact thing that we should have been trying to prevent. We should have been spending the last 2 decades, as I argued back in 2000, that we needed to split up the Sino-Russian alliance and kind of make peace with Russia, so that we could focus on China by itself. This is a map of Ukraine, and here we have the Russian-occupied regions, their annexed regions. All 4 of those were annexed by Russia back in September of 2022. Something I predicted they would do in April if Zelensky didn't agree to a peace agreement by that time. Initially, Russia had said they wanted to withdraw from Zaporizhia and Kherson, as well as the 3 northern Ukrainian oblasts of Kyiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv, which is actually what they did in April of 2022. So this is a map of a potential Russian winter offensive, which could occur in the next few months. This is actually a map that predates, I think, the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. But it's something they could still do. They have the manpower to do that. They have about 300,000 reserve troops located outside of Kharkiv Oblast. So right over here, the Belgorod region, which they could use to drive south and kind of, along with troops from the southern region, cut off most of the Ukrainian armed forces in the eastern Ukrainian region. So that's something we don't want to see. We don't want to see Russia take control of even 1 more inch of Ukrainian territory, which is why I've been arguing for an armistice agreement. Myself, as well as Vivek Ramaswamy, who I was honored to work for as his defense and foreign policy advisor for 8 months. And you can find his proposed peace agreement online as well. So I recently watched a webinar that was with Biden's Undersecretary of Defense was speaking, and he stated an alarming fact, and that is that back in September 2022, when Ukraine was prosecuting their successful Kharkiv counteroffensive, U.S. intelligence told the president that the risks of nuclear escalation by Russia had increased from 5% at the beginning of the war to 50%. So 50% chance. This was all of U.S. intelligence, and they had substantiated those claims. And as in response to that, on October 6th, Biden told a Democratic fundraiser attendees that we're closer to nuclear war than any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he's not telling that to the American people. He hasn't done anything to resolve the war in Ukraine. In fact, he's escalated. He's sending Abrams tanks, F-16s, everything he can to provoke Russia to attack us. So it really makes you wonder what his real intention is. I mean, does he want the U.S. to be tens of millions of Americans to be killed off? Because that's what it seems like. And thankfully, we have President Trump, who stood very principally and said that we have to demand an immediate negotiation of a peaceful end to the war in Ukraine, or we'll end up in World War III. And I think he's exactly right. And that's why I've endorsed him. So, as I mentioned, the proxy U.S. or Biden's, I call it Biden's war against Russia and Ukraine, is making the U.S. a lot less safe. As Dr. John Mearsheimer, a foremost foreign policy realist, has stated, if he didn't use this exact comparison, this is one I've used. If Texas had succeeded from the U.S. Back in 1991, as Ukraine had seceded from Russia, and they had allied with Russia and China against us, with Russian and Chinese troops stationed on our borders, in Russian and Chinese weapons coming through, would we have stood for that? I mean, no, we would have invaded, bombed, and annexed all of Texas and called it a defensive war. And that's basically what Putin's done. Again, not justifying what Russia's done, but saying that if you put yourselves in their shoes, you can predict their actions, why they did it, and you can figure out what we should do to prevent that in the future, not provoking our enemies unnecessarily. Again, China, it's a different story. We have to stay strong against them. I don't think we should fight a war against them, but we have to defend our allies in the Pacific. Putin's strategic restraint has been pretty remarkable thus far in refraining from any direct retaliation against the U.S. and NATO, but I think his forbearance is reaching its limits. We could very well see a Russian cyber attack, a massive Russian cyber attack that could really hurt Americans, and that's something I'd like to see avoided. Essentially, the war between Russia and Ukraine is a border dispute over a slice of territory the size of Lithuania. It's not an existential fight. Ukraine is not threatened existentially. Putin doesn't want to take over Ukraine. He just wants an armistice along the current lines of control and a promise that Ukraine will never join NATO, modifying their constitution to account for that. Back in February, Condoleezza Rice, former U.S. Secretary of State, actually stated that there was evidence, U.S. intelligence had evidence that China was considering joining the war against Russia's side in the Ukraine war directly. So that just shows how close Russia and China really are. So we've sent $113 billion to Ukraine thus far. Maybe a lot higher than that, but that's kind of the main figure that we hear bandied about. Biden wants to send another $61 billion. The counteroffensive proved that Ukraine has no ability to retake territory from Russia anymore because Russia's defenses are so strong. They retook about 0.25% of their territory back from Russia and lost up to 80,000 dead. Is what the figure I've heard. So there's really no point. There's no point to not, have an armistice with Russia, because it's only going to get worse. Russia has over 5 times more people. They have over 5 times more tanks, artillery, aircraft. Economy is 11 times larger, and they have 8,000 more nuclear weapons than Ukraine has. Putin he's developed 6 different new nuclear super weapons, 5 of which are operational. That I'll discuss later. But he also has 2,500 subkiloton nuclear weapons he could use to defeat Ukraine. He's really been forcing the Russian army to fight with one hand tied behind its back, much like we were forced to fight in Vietnam. And that's why Russia hasn't won outright lately, because it's not Russian military is not even allowed to target Zelensky or government or Ministry of Defense buildings in Kyiv. The U.S. has implemented what I call a strategy of denial, and that is, Russia and China lead a military alliance that includes 71% of the landmass of Eurasia, 43% of the world's population, nearly a third of the world's GDP, and over 80% of the world's operational nuclear weapons, most of which are deployed by Russia. And until February of 2022, we wouldn't even declare the Sino-Russian alliance existed. It was complete denial. All the national security experts were saying Russia and China had too many differences. They'd never ally together. Yeah, Russia and China, they have 7 to 8 times more operational nuclear weapons than we do, according to my estimates. And that's been something I've studied for many decades. They have Russia has 225 times more ground-based ABMs than the US has, and could shoot down potentially 80 to 90% of our nuclear retaliatory force or strike force. Whereas the US has, and I know this as a previous Missile Defense Agency employee, that we don't have any ABMs in position to shoot down even one Russian nuclear warhead in the event of nuclear war. So it's actually official US policy that the US not defend against Russian or Chinese nuclear missile attack, if you can believe that. I mean, what is the purpose of nearly 900 billion in defense spending every year, if not to defend against the existential threats we face from Russia and China? It's just maddening. No, it's not. It's not crazy at all. Yeah, so she just said, is it crazy to think that they're purposefully doing nothing to defend our country? And that's actually been US policy since the ABM treaty. We used to have a national missile defense system. It wasn't foolproof, but it was more than we have today. And it was ordered dismantled in 1975 under the belief that it was too provocative, that it was too destabilizing to have a minimal national missile defense system. But Russia and China don't believe that. They believe nuclear wars can be fought and won. They believe they should do everything they can to defend their population. I mean, just like any other country should. And as a result, they have national missile defense systems that can shoot down potentially hundreds of warheads. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna hold comments to the end, but thank you for that. So Russia and China and North Korea, as I talk about in my book Catastrophe Now, they have a lot of different super weapons that we don't even have: nuclear hypersonic missiles, super EMP weapons, all kinds of stuff that we don't even have plans to develop. So if we fought a war with Russia or China, we would likely lose. This kind of talks about that, all the disadvantages we have in terms of nuclear weapons. They are in the process of deploying probably 10 times more ready to fire operational strategic nuclear warheads than we have. I mean, if we had that kind of imbalance during World War III, the Cold War with the Soviet Union, the Soviets would have won the war. I mean, it's just obvious. They would have invaded and occupied us, I think. And our nuclear arsenal is in some cases, it's over half a century old. Minuteman III was deployed in, I think it was in 1970. That was, 53 plus years ago. And that's not the only, obviously B-52s as well, even older than that. Despite that, there's only a few Republican members of Congress that advocated increasing the size of our strategic nuclear arsenal by even one warhead. These are some of the 6 Russian nuclear super weapons that they're developing. I'm not going to really go into this, but this presentation, a copy of this will be available to anyone that requests it. I'll be sending the final copy to Marcelo, and you can get it from him or get it from me direct. So Russia and China have a contingency plan to defeat the US using what I call MBCE weapons. And nuclear, of course, biological, and then C stands for cyber instead of chemical, and E stands for EMP. So that's just an acronym I made up, so you won't find that online. But they could take out all of our GPS early warning satellites. They could take out our communications, internet, transportation, food distribution systems, water purification distribution systems, and essentially the U.S. U.S. population would starve in place, unless, of course, if we have food storage, then we would be a lot better off, right? And this is the place. I'm telling everyone, this is the best place to buy your food storage. I got some great deals going on here. You know, the Chinese balloon that hovered overhead for, you know, traversed the entire country over a 1 week period. If they had had nuclear or super EMP weapons, they could have killed tens of millions of Americans. And the U.S. did absolutely nothing to defend us against that threat. Then, of course, biological weapons. You know, COVID, that was a Chinese biological weapon that killed off 1.17 million Americans. So in a sense, we're almost already at war with China, and we've done nothing whatsoever to respond in kind. So I talked about some of the effects of EMP attack. Again, up to 90% of Americans could die. That's about 275 million Americans. I mean, that's just genocide. You know, that's like, you know, final solution genocide, you know, that we saw from Hitler against the Jews. So, and that's something that they would likely do in the event of war. You know, they would start with the cyber attack. And if they felt the massive cyber attack didn't work to defeat us completely, they likely would resort to EMP as well. So that's why it's so important we not defend Taiwan militarily, try to seek a peaceful solution while defending all of our treaty allies in the Pacific and, of course, Western Europe and Europe. So moving to Israel, the Israel-Gaza war. So this is kind of a timeline of Israel and Iranian history. Don't have time to go over it all, but essentially Israel developed nukes around 1963 to 1979. They don't really admit they have nukes, but everyone knows they have nukes. In 2003, Iran may have developed nuclear weapons that far back. 2005, they started building ICBMs or developing ICBMs that they've just started building recently. There's no country in the entire, in history other than Iran that's built ICBMs without first admitting to have built nuclear weapons first. So there's really no reason to have an ICBM without nuclear weapons. One more sign that Iran likely has nukes. Israel is one of the most secure countries in the world. It's actually the most militarized at this point, with 66 troops per square mile versus only 28 per square mile for North Korea. It's got a pretty small population of less than 10 million, but over 500,000 troops. So they're also the fourth largest nuclear power with 400 nuclear weapons, just behind the US. So they certainly can defend themselves. I have little doubt that they'll easily win this war in Gaza. The problem, of course, is potential escalation that would involve Iran and potentially even Russia and China as Iranian allies. We don't want to see that happen because that really could threaten Israel's existence. So there's really no reason for the U.S. to get directly involved in the conflict. Israel is actually 57 times larger than Gaza. And I don't really believe that. I think Israel's overreacted. I think they're kind of waging a collective punishment campaign. So I have a peace plan I'll go over on one of the next slides. So in terms of Iran's nuclear missile program, they do have admittedly medium-range ballistic missiles as well as intermediate-range nuclear missiles that can range, I think, about 2,000 miles that they've admitted. But they also have tested, they've launched some satellites using ICBM technology. 3 satellites total, 2 of which are still in orbit. And both of those are orbiting at 280 miles altitude, which is the optimal altitude to stage a super EMP attack against the US. So I estimate that they likely have two super EMP weapons satellites in orbit, just like North Korea. So we really don't want to have bomb Iran because they could hit us back hard. And by the way, the latest satellite they launched, EMP satellite, was 9 days before the Hamas attacks, which they helped plan. So I mean, that was another sign that they're ready for war if we push them too hard. So obviously, we all know that Hamas killed 1,200 Israelis very horrifically on October 7th, launching 5,000 rockets, cross-border raids. Took about 250 hostages, both Israeli and foreign hostages. That demonstrated a massive failure of U.S. and Israeli intelligence in particular. But again, it's not an existential war. And it doesn't really affect U.S. national security. So here's a map of Israel. You can see Gaza, again, very tiny. It's about 29 miles long, I think, either 27 to 29 miles long, about 7 miles wide at its southern largest extent. Israel is a tiny country in and of itself, so that just shows how small Gaza really is. Israel is engaged in a land, sea, and air blockade of Gaza, and the invasion and bombings have caused 80% of Gaza's residents to become refugees. So it's a much greater humanitarian catastrophe than we see in Ukraine, where it's just 30% refugees. And the kill ratio is actually, Israel has been killing civilians at a rate that's about 10 times higher than Russia has killed Ukrainian civilians. There's been a lot of extreme statements by Lindsey Graham, let's flatten Gaza, destroy Gaza, wipe it off the face of the earth. The thing is that 98% of Gaza residents are civilians. They're not Hamas fighters. They're not Islamic Jihad, and their lives matter too. I mean, I believe that all lives have equal value before God. And so I'm not saying Israel's a bad country. I'm just saying the U.S. should intervene and try to mediate a peace agreement. So in terms of whether this will escalate to World War III, I have a pretty good confidence that it won't. But there's always that latent potential with nuclear powers kind of in the mix. If Iran were to get involved directly in the war, and of course if the U.S. did, it could absolutely escalate to a nuclear war. This is a map that kind of shows how Chinese missiles, they have kind of an anti-ship missiles that go out 1,500 miles from the Chinese coast that could take out all our aircraft carriers and any other major surface warships in the area. And as Trump rightly stated, because Taiwan, in his words, were 100 miles away from China and 8,000 miles away from the U.S., it's just an unwinnable war. There's no way we could defend Taiwan, and I think that's accurate. China has a plan to defeat the U.S. in war over Taiwan. Just last week, I think, Taiwan elected a new president, and their new president comes from the Pro-Independence Party, the DPP, and I think his name is, it's Chin-Ti, I think is his last name, Lai Chin-Ti, and he is basically China said that if you elect this guy, it's going to be war. So I believe that they've started a countdown to war. We don't know what the timetable is, but that's a very dangerous threat. If Biden doesn't defend Taiwan militarily, I think we'll survive just fine. But if he does, that's a different story. So what are the solutions to get us out of this mess? Number one solution, vote Trump. Hopefully there's a lot of Trump supporters here. I haven't always been a Trump supporter, but I can tell you that at this point, I view it as it's a matter of survival for the U.S. I mean, Biden is destroying America, both at home and abroad. I don't think we can survive another term. No. So I actually had a peace proposal that I published in the national interest to end the war in Ukraine. That was in June of 2022. And Ukraine hated it so much, they put me on their blacklist, along with Tulsi Gabbard, as you can see. This is an actual screenshot from their website. They also have Rand Paul, Tucker Carlson, Colonel Douglas McGregor, and some other folks. So I'm not, it calls it, it says 35 high-profile Americans. I don't think people know me that well, but so I'm honored to be on that blacklist. Russia actually thought, they thought my peace proposal was minimally acceptable. So, and that's the thing is, when there's a war, the country that's winning or the country that's dominant in the conflict, you have to have a peace proposal that's minimally acceptable to them. You may not like it, but you have to do it. With Israel, we can't say, hey, you have to have a two-state Palestinian solution. They won't accept it, so we can't support it. And it's the same thing with Russia. So here's my Gaza war peace plan. We call for immediate ceasefire and end to the blockade. Hamas would have to release all hostages, surrender UN peacekeepers, and then agree to leave Gaza permanently. And in exchange for amnesty, Gaza would become a demilitarized protectorate occupied by Israel, but would be granted, their citizens would be granted rights and limited self-rule. Um, and Israel would pledge not to have any Jewish settlements built there again, and there would be a reconstruction of all the critical infrastructure. Here's running short on time, so I'll have to speed through this a little bit, but I have a grand strategy to combat the rise of China that's available on my website. Includes, obviously partnering with Russia, making peace with them, pulling our troops out of Eastern Europe, having some kind of mutual security agreement with Russia, defending all of our treaty allies in the Pacific, but not Taiwan, having some kind of compromise agreement. It could just be a face-saving deal where it's an EU-style confederation. Taiwan in name only maybe becomes part of China, but they retain their military. They don't have any Chinese occupation troops, but maybe they fly the Chinese flag or a Chinese Confederation flag and recognize that Xi Jinping is the head of the Chinese Confederation, which includes China and Taiwan. So I have that proposal on my website as well. In terms of dividing the Sino-Russian alliance, I mentioned a mutual security agreement with Russia. That would be key to wouldn't break up the Sino-Russian alliance, but it would essentially neutralize them as a military ally of China. Because at this point, I think if we were to fight a war with China, Russia would join the war actively as a belligerent on the Chinese side. But if we were to have a mutual security agreement with them that recognizes their legitimate security interests, I think they'd stay neutral. And that alone could deter China from seeking war with us. A sphere of influence agreement. That's something we can do as well. We'll talk about that in the next slide. So the goal, as Vivek Ramaswamy stated, is to transform the current bipolar international order into a tripolar international order. Because today we have Russia and China on one side, two nuclear superpowers against one. I mean, who's going to win a war? It's not easy to guess because they massively overmatch us together. But if there were three separate countries with no alliances, no permanent alliances, then I think we could survive and have peaceful coexistence in that kind of world. So lessons from history. We talked about the Texas example. So I often relate the U.S. to Imperial Germany in 1914. Just like the U.S. today, they were the second largest economic and industrial power with the second largest merchant fleet, but they faced an enemy alliance of four great powers, just as we do today. Those nuclear powers being Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And they stumbled into a war they really didn't want because they were worried that they were surrounded. They'd be wiped out if they didn't. And as a result, they were defeated, disarmed, and dismembered just 5 years later, defenseless against invasion from even small countries. And that could happen to us, really could, if we don't change our policies. So to avoid Germany's fate, Germany had something called the Reinsurance Treaty of 1887 with Russia. It basically said, in the event of war with another great power, then the other country would remain neutral. So that's really what we need from Russia. We need them to pledge to stay neutral in the event of any direct open U.S.-Chinese or Sino-American war. This is my proposed sphere of influence agreement. Basically just recognizes the world as it exists. So, Russia, all the Russian allies are in red. Essentially, they have a sphere of influence over Soviet Central Asia and Iran, Belarus, Ukraine, of course, being a neutral buffer state. And then we would kind of pull back from Eastern Europe. So we wouldn't have the Article 5 guarantee apply to Eastern Europe anymore. And that'd make them much less inclined to war with Russia. They're very militaristic. They're chomping at the bit for war with Russia, Poland especially, wanting to retake lost territories, understandably. But you can't retake those from a nuclear superpower like Russia. So in terms of a strategy for assured national survival, we know that great power alliances transform two regional wars in Eastern Europe into unnecessary world wars. That's exactly the situation we have in Ukraine. It's a regional war that could be transformed to a world war. and we don't want history to repeat itself. So the overriding U.S. national security priority should be to pursue policies that protect, preserve, and defend the 300 million Americans in this country, as well as other permanent, residents. And that means we don't fight wars half a world away that are, don't really affect our security. We focus on defending the Western Hemisphere, Western Europe, Japan, other strategically important countries. Article 5 actually doesn't, of the NATO Atlantic Charter, doesn't actually require us to go to war, but it's being interpreted that way. So if Russia were to even have a border dispute with Lithuania, for example, that it has with Ukraine, that could get us into a nuclear war. So that's why I say we should kind of create a buffer zone between Western Europe and Russia that keeps Eastern Europe in NATO, but without U.S. troops, returning to the 2016 status quo. Also pulling back a lot of our military bases. This is one of the last slides. So I think we should pursue what I call full spectrum defense, aggressively pursuing diplomatic peace offensives with Russia and China, but also massively building up our nuclear arsenal, our ABMs, ABM-4, especially space-based missile defenses, and hardening the grid against the EMP attack, which is a lot of what my organization is all about. As well as, one of the easiest things we can do is we can return our 2,000 strategic nuclear warheads in reserve to active service and deploy those on our Minuteman IIIs and try to intercontinental ballistic missiles to more than double the size of our nuclear arsenal. And we need to fully fund nuclear modernization efforts as well. And there's a whole bunch of other really good ideas I have in the book I co-wrote that if you guys want a copy, again, it's called Catastrophe Now. It's available on Amazon.com. At one point, it was the #1 hot new release, but it's not quite there anymore. So we've heard faith, not fear. I really believe in that. I know this might be seem like a doom and gloom presentation, but there is a path to overcome and save our country. But ultimately, we need to put God first. We need to, repent. I know I have to repent every day of our sins collectively as Americans, and turn back to God in order to regain His armor of protection. And that's a promise that the Lord gives in the Holy Bible, 2 Corinthians 7:14. That's a beautiful promise. He says, "If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land." So I love that. So last slide, what we can do to save America. One of the things you can do is sign up to my newsletter, dpyne.substack.com. Share my peace proposals and other articles with the members of Congress, even state leaders, the governor, lieutenant governor, state representatives. Get them to want to support peace with our enemies and end unnecessary wars, and also harden the grid against EMP attack, which we can do at the state level as well, not just with Congress. Buy a copy of my new book and the new book I'm coming out with. And again, if you want a copy of the presentation, please reach out to Marcelo or myself, and I'd be happy to send that to you. So with that, that is the end of my presentation. I want to thank you for all participating, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Are we going to have a microphone for questions?
Yes, so if you guys have any questions, please just wait for the microphone to come to you.
Okay, this gentleman here first.
So you mentioned a lot.
senior cabinet officials that are kind of, controlling the country. We know that Biden is, he lacks the cognitive ability to, know what day it is or which way to leave the podium. He needs his wife's help for that hand holding. So yeah, it's a scary situation because we don't really know who's leading our country, but we know what Biden said, and that's scary enough. He says that, we're going to defend Taiwan according to our commitment, which ended in 1979. Jimmy Carter got rid of the U.S.-Taiwan Mutual Security Treaty. So, but yeah, I think Obama was a terrible president. I don't think he did as much damage as George W. Bush did, but he was a socialist, not nearly as bad as Biden. I mean, you look at what the way Obama was and the things we thought were extreme. Biden is so much worse. But sad part is Obama's right there with them now. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned hardening the power grid. Can you talk about some of what the practical things that can or should be done to achieve that?
Yeah, so we've been supporting grid hardening legislation since at least 2010. We've been organized as the task force since 2009. We're a congressionally authorized board. So the GRID Act passed, which would have hardened the grid with $2 billion. It passed unanimously with the Democrat-controlled House in 2010, but it was killed in the Senate Energy Committee by Lisa Murkowski, liberal Republican. We had the SHIELD Act that it didn't get out of committee. There really hasn't been any serious effort since to harden the grid, but yeah, hardening the grid, we estimate would cost probably around $50 billion nationally, or about $500 million in Utah. My funding proposal that I recently am releasing is that it wouldn't be like a government spending per se. It would be kind of a user fee that would be tacked on to power bills. So for example, a business that had like a $10,000 a month power bill would pay way more. As a percentage, it'd be maybe 0.5% or up to 3% for like 3 to 5 years. And that would be sufficient to pay for it. But yeah, it's basically, think of it as kind of a surge protector for the power stations, transformers, substations that would essentially be able to absorb the EMP kind of gamma rays to prevent them from destroying the electronics and enable them to continue to function. Any other questions? Sir.
You seem to have a very practical approach to defending the United States. You mentioned it's impractical to defend Taiwan. How is it more practical to defend Japan?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Japan obviously it's a bigger country, has a more powerful conventional military, but it doesn't have nuclear weapons. So the ultimate, but it does border on Russia, and it's not nearly as close to China as Taiwan is, but certainly.
It's that far away. It's still a long ways away.
Yeah. Russia and China, if they wanted to take it, they could. The main issue is that Taiwan is kind of like a red line. It's like a nuclear red line for China, much like Ukraine is for Russia. So
if we make the decision not to defend Taiwan, how is that going to affect our decision to defend Japan? Wouldn't the reasoning be the same, not to defend Japan?
I mean, again, that's a good question, and that's okay. Yeah. So this gentleman just asked whether the decision not to defend Taiwan because it's closer to China would affect our decision to defend Japan because it's also in China's neighborhood, very close to it. Strategically, that's definitely something worth considering. I've considered it myself. I think that the main answer to the question is that China they don't view Japan as something that they have to conquer. So their plan to take over the world is economic, and also political. Well, for example, getting friends of China like Joe Biden that are essentially paid and controlled CCP assets elected to lead various countries, while also buying up our economies and making us entirely dependent, almost in terms of monopolies for rare earths, for example, pharmaceuticals, life-saving pharmaceuticals. And their plan to invade Japan is only contingent on whether we defend Taiwan. So you raise a really good point. But my answer is I don't think we necessarily even need U.S. forces in Japan to defend Japan, because I don't think China is going to invade it if we don't provoke it to war over Taiwan. Any other questions?
Um,
Yes, sir.
so there's been 158,000 deaths in America in the first 9 months of 2023 as compared to 2019. Does the increase in deaths since COVID, does that come into any of your analysis?
No, I don't think that's a national, I mean, I don't see a national security issue there. Certainly that's a concern, but I mean, I'm not an expert on what the cause of that is. We know that the life expectancy of Americans, particularly American men, has gone down a few years since COVID broke out. Obviously, the COVID deaths have a lot to do with that, but I don't really have an answer as to what else might be responsible. Sir.
Why hasn't China attacked Taiwan already?
China's been preparing to attack Taiwan for the last 74 years, of course, since the end of the Chinese Civil War. And they've been ready, I assess, since about 2020, me and some other military experts. At this point, there's a timetable, I believe, that Xi Jinping has established to take it over. I think it's probably 2025. But they've been looking for, the best time to do that. I think the Biden presidency provides them a window of vulnerability to do that at low risk. I don't think they feel that threatened by Biden, but they also, and I think they fear Trump. Ironically, I think Trump would be less likely to defend Taiwan because he's a lot smarter than Biden, and he'd be more likely to do a deal with China, which would protect Taiwan, but also have some kind of confederation along the lines that I proposed. But I think if they haven't invaded Taiwan by November, if Trump wins, I think they likely would just after the election.
Have you looked at the extensive ownership of that China has in Taiwan already?
Yeah, they do have strong business ties with Taiwan, and just like the U.S., they control a lot of their strategic industries, buying up natural resources. Obviously, what they don't control are the semiconductors, the advanced semiconductors. That if we were to lose those, we'd take a 8% GDP hit, kind of go into a minor depression, or really a full-scale depression. But if we defend Taiwan, we can't protect Taiwan from. It would be essentially they would take it over, and then we try to retake it, but we wouldn't likely be able to get past their blockade, and we'd probably get destroyed as a result because they probably EMP us or cyber attack us, maybe even a nuclear decapitation strike. So we'd lose 100% of our economy. Sir.
Do we have any intel as to the Chinese are they being organized undercover here?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's 100,000 Chinese military-age men that have crossed the border that have been apprehended. So it doesn't include gotaways, probably 20, 30,000, at least more. And we have a high degree of confidence that they are PLA veterans. And obviously they're here for purposes that are very malignant to us. They could spread bioweapons from that lab in Ridley, California to kill tens of thousands or hundred thousands of Americans. They could assassinate U.S. political and military leaders. They could blow up key military targets. They could take down our grid just with sabotage attacks. So the fact that Biden doesn't know, he's literally, there used to be I think 25 questions that they had to answer. Now it's down to 5. So the Chinese troops basically memorize the answers to the questions and they get a pass from Border Patrol. So Biden, quite literally, his policies are destroying our country, letting 10 million illegals, including 100,000 Chinese, cross the border, not families, but, military-age men. And I think it's a huge national security risk to the U.S. And the scary part is they covered up the Chinese biolab. They wouldn't investigate it. The FBI and CDC wouldn't investigate it. They burned the evidence and they claimed that no crimes were committed. So why is Biden trying to protect the communist Chinese terrorists that are trying to kill Americans? That's a question I think needs to be asked. Anyone else? Sir, again, yeah,
What, being that you were involved with Vivek,
I was, yeah,
his campaign,
yeah.
what cabinet position do you think he would work with best with?
So I would love to see him as Secretary of State. I'd love to see him as Vice President. That would be obviously my top pick. Glenn Beck was recently on a podcast, I think with, I can't remember the guy's name, but it's a big one. And it was Patrick Ben David, I think, PBD. And he said that Glenn Beck was, so he was called by Trump and asked Glenn Beck, Trump asked Glenn Beck, who should I pick for VP? And he said, Vivek Ramaswamy. And Trump reportedly responded, that's the number one answer I get. So I would be really excited to see Vivek on the ticket. I think he'd do a great job. It'd be great to have, someone who's an ethnic minority on the ticket, but he's just brilliant and he's courageous. He's fearless. He doesn't modify his positions or what he says based on what he thinks people want to hear. He just says what he believes to be true. And I really admire that. Chief of Staff would be another great position for him. White House Chief of Staff. Anyone else? Sir.
Yeah, when Trump gets reelected, do you see a deportation policy put in for this illegal invasion of our country?
I think I would be, I would think that deportation policy would be limited to criminal aliens, felons, violent felons. I think that was kind of his policy before. I would be really surprised if he, did a mass deportation. We haven't really seen that since Eisenhower. I would support it, but I don't think we need to do it. I think that, there's a lot of identity theft, and that's a felony. So if I were president, I would definitely deport all the people who do that, and that's over half. I think it's 45%, if I recall correctly, at one point of all illegals are engaged in either violent crimes or identity theft. And so I would absolutely kick all those people out of the country. But I don't know what Trump would do. But I think he would just continue the policy he had before.
He says he's going to do a mass deportation.
Yeah, and so does Nikki Haley, which surprised me because she was kind of more pro-amnesty in her earlier political years. I think a lot of it is, honestly, I think it's campaign talking points. Trump obviously made a lot of promises he didn't keep. He didn't build the full wall. He tried to, sincerely. He said he would throw Hillary in prison. I was there at the Republican convention in 2016 and heard him say that in person, and he didn't follow through on that. And I think that was probably the right decision. But there were some other more important promises that he didn't keep, but that maybe he'd be more likely to keep because he's been, he's like under prosecution by the weaponized FBI. They're trying to make him die in prison, like throw him in prison for life. And that he might feel a little differently about keeping promises on that front. Any others?
Just out of curiosity, what is your belief or your thought as far as targets that could be these 100,000 Chinese that have come across, targets here in this state, besides Hill Air Force Base and Dugway, that could possibly be hit?
Well, honestly, so in terms of nuclear targets, the only nuclear target that I'm worried about is Hill Air Force Base. That's guaranteed. That's one of 12, 13 top nuclear targets. That there are nuclear warheads that are there, like reserve warheads. They also have F-35 nuclear capable fighter bombers. So aside from that, yeah, it'd be just probably Dugway and the Tooele Army Depot, NSA, yeah. So not a lot of big military targets here in the state. Yes, ma'am.
So the Spy Center that's just out west of Redwood Road, out by Camp Williams, does that have any kind of a play in all of this?
Well, yeah, obviously that's an NSA intel center. I mean, I honestly think that the Chinese could take that out with a cyber attack. Mm-hmm. But obviously, if they had troops in Utah, they'd take it out. But
would that be a target?
It would be a target. Yeah, not a nuclear target, but if they had troops here, they'd throw some missiles, and destroy it. So yeah.
You said that Israel was the most secure nation in the world, and yet Hamas invaded them, got through their impervious border. There didn't seem to be any kind of military response for several hours. How do you explain? And what I understand, and I don't have good sources like you do, but apparently the Egyptians were warning them about this attack weeks in advance.
Yeah, it's very, I didn't want to believe what I'm coming to believe. Like, I didn't want to believe that Netanyahu purposely did kind of pull an FDR Pearl Harbor thing. And I think the evidence is starting to point in that direction, that he deliberately kind of stood down Israeli intelligence and allowed the attacks to occur. I don't necessarily think he provoked the attacks, but I think he knew they were coming because Israel did have 1 year's warning, and they kind of dismissed the evidence. That's not like Israel. Israel typically is very vigilant on things like that. There were other reports that there were a couple of female Israeli Defense Force kind of spotters at watch stations that reported it, and the Israeli military didn't respond right away. Like you said, for several hours. They also withdrew one Israeli battalion from one of the bases on the border, which was, was a very critical base that got taken over temporarily. And I think, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, he has had a goal of kind of establishing a greater Israel that would include kind of a stealth annexation of Gaza for some time. He tried to negotiate that with Israel, where he would deport all 2.4 million Gazan civilians from Gaza to the Sinai Peninsula, but Egypt wouldn't agree to it. So I'm beginning to fear that may be his plan, to try to just make living conditions so miserable in Gaza that they just leave. Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think it's just not like Israel to ignore intelligence like that, and you have to start to wonder. And only 15% of Israelis support. If there was a vote, 15% of Israelis would support Netanyahu in the election. Same percentage for Zelensky. They blame, so Ukrainian people are starting to blame Zelensky for losing the war, getting 500,000 Ukrainians killed off. Obviously, Russia pulled the triggers. But the Israelis are blaming Netanyahu for not defending Israel and kind of being asleep at the switch. So, anything else? Ma'am.
So I know you mentioned NSA over here by Camp Williams earlier, but you know how China is all big on the social credit score and everything like that. Is it really a target to be destroyed or captured?
That's a really good question. I haven't really thought that through, but yeah, I think they would probably cyber attack it, and then they probably would try to take it over. I mean, they have amazing cyber offensive capabilities. Like they've stolen so much personal data, intelligence, weapons data. I mean, they're very good at that. They have an army of about 60,000 attackers. They actually have a dedicated cyber force. It's not just cyber. I think it's basically unconventional weapons, like includes EMP and space weapons as well. But they have an entire branch of the military that they just set up in 2015 that they stood up for that purpose. And if they thought they could get more information and they had a large invading army, I think you're right. I think they'd try to take it over. Anyone else?
Anybody online? Any questions?
Any online questions? I've been told we have a lot more online folks attending via Zoom than we have here in the audience.
I'm curious, what would be the trigger for Russia to do things, especially over Ukraine, where they wanted the land, they want the resources, but they wouldn't be able to even have the land for many, many, many years. What would be the benefit?
Yeah, so that's a big misconception. So my last presentation was given in I think it was in Highland. Yeah, it was the Highland group to folks that it's a group that's co-led by Lowell Nelson, and Joel Skousen, basically spoke the next month, last month in December, and he spent about a third of his remarks attacking me, on various issues and misrepresenting me. And I posted on my Substack about that. But can you repeat your question again?
Just wondering what
trigger.
would be the trigger for Russia to use that?
Yeah, so the trigger.
Destroy Ukraine.
So the reason I mentioned that is a lot of people don't realize Russia has 2,500 battlefield nuclear weapons that are sub-kiloton, and they produce zero fallout. So you wouldn't irradiate the land, is what I'm saying. If there was a nuclear crater, you'd avoid that, kind of the general area, but there wouldn't be radioactive fallout spreading through the air across wide swaths of Ukrainian territory. So the nuclear trigger that U.S. intelligence was worrying about, it wasn't against the U.S. It was Russia was planning to nuke Ukraine. And when I say nuke, I mean use a small number of tactical nuclear warheads, perhaps against Kyiv as a kind of a demonstration attack to kind of, injure a lot of people, not kill anyone directly. But they certainly, they have the ability at any point, during the war in the last couple of years to do that. But the trigger would be Russia feels like they're about to be invaded. If Ukraine had launched a major offensive into Russian territory, like pre-war Russian territory, that would have been a nuclear trigger. The talk about, Zelensky keeps talking about, we're going to retake Crimea. He's been saying that for 3 years now. That would be a nuclear trigger. So that's really the main nuclear trigger would be Crimea. But even as Kharkov, if they were to try to take over Belgorod, they'd probably for sure get nuked, I think.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Just curious what your thoughts are with the NATO exercise, Steadfast Defender, that they just announced, where they say that they're going to be moving 90,000 troops across the Atlantic, and what that might do to the tensions in the area.
Yeah, I think it's very provocative. 90,000 troops. We haven't seen that since the old Reforger NATO exercises back in the mid '80s, mid to late '80s. I think we stopped doing those in like '89, when it looked like the Soviet Union might pull out of Eastern Europe and the Warsaw Pact. I don't think that's going to be a trigger. I don't view that as a trigger like I view the Taiwanese presidential election, where the Taiwanese president's going to take over on May 20th. I'm pretty concerned about that. But it's just a bad idea. There's no reason for it. Russia has no plans to invade NATO unless we attack them first. If we have a no-fly zone that shoots down Russian aircraft in Ukraine, if we send 10,000 combat troops into Ukraine to fight Russia directly, they're going to invade NATO for sure. But other than that, unless the U.S. gets wiped out by China, they're not going to attack NATO. So we shouldn't be, it's just this Cold War mentality. And the Cold War mentality works for China because they're an evil, mass murderous communist regime. But Russia, Putin is not he's not a mass murderer on the level of Hitler or Stalin, not even close. UN Human Rights Commission has reported that 10,000 Ukrainian civilians have died in the last 2 years since Russia invaded. 25,000 Palestinians that Israel's killed so far. And I think that many of those have been deliberate killings, whereas Putin has tried to avoid civilian casualties. We've heard about war crimes. Certainly there's been low-level war crimes on both sides, Russia and Ukraine, but no major war crimes. Yeah. Okay, it looks like we might have time for one more, if there is one more.
So along the same lines, you mentioned reducing our own military capability here at home. We left a bunch of our stuff in Afghanistan. We're sending a bunch of stuff to Ukraine. We're sending stuff to Israel, who doesn't need it.
Right.
And we have our border issues. So I look at this big picture and think all this together, in addition to all our other bases worldwide, and resources there, and we're kind of left very weak here at home. So I can't help that that's just an accidental oversight.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just hubris. I really do think Biden and the neocon crowd, they really believe that the U.S. is still the biggest boy in the block, so to speak, as Colin Powell stated in 2003. Um, that we can push other countries around, and we're the most powerful military in the world. That might have been true to some extent after the fall of the Soviet Union. It's not the case anymore, not even close. I mean, China has the largest army, Navy, Coast Guard, nuclear missile force, nuclear capable missile force. So we have weakened, as you mentioned, not only have we destroyed 90% of our nuclear weapons, nuclear arsenal, but we have either destroyed or retired warheads, but we've also been shipping tens of thousands of advanced weapons, missile systems to Ukraine for a war that honestly, if we'd ended the war in March or April of 2022, Ukraine could have had maybe all of its territory back. Now the best they can hope for is 88% or 82%. And that's half a million Ukrainian deaths, soldier deaths, and seriously wounded later. So, I call Biden's policy a policy of national suicide for the exact reasons that you stated: disarming the U.S. military unilaterally in the face of a massive conventional and nuclear buildup by our enemies, pushing our enemies closer together, provoking them to attack us. We don't have to be doing that. We don't have any business fighting in Ukraine. Yes, we have some interest in defending Taiwan, but it's not possible. There's something called the Weinberger-Powell doctrine, sometimes referred to as the Reagan doctrine. And one of the main tenets is you don't fight a war that you don't have a good chance of winning. And we have no good chance of winning war in Taiwan for all the reasons I stated. I do think we should defend our Pacific Treaty allies. I think we can peacefully coexist with China if we allow some kind of, reunification, confederation agreement with Taiwan. But it's really scary that, it's against U.S. policy to defend against Russian and Chinese nuclear missile attack. So if that actually happens, we won't have the ability to do it. And it's a tremendous dereliction of duty, just like not hardening the grid against EMP attack. If we fight Russia or China, we lose. It's not a question. I'm saying that as a national security expert that studied war for 40 years. Yeah. Okay, yes. The online question is, how can the U.S. continue to act as the world's police force? The answer is we can't. It should be we can't. We don't have the capabilities to do so. We're spread too thin. If there's a war with China, it's not going to be a one-front war. It's going to be a four-front war. It's going to be Iran, North Korea, invading South Korea, Iran maybe attacking Israel, Russia probably invading the Baltics, and then we're having to deal with Taiwan at the same time. Probably Japan, perhaps a Russian and Chinese invasion of Japan, even Hawaii and Alaska as well. There's just we never should have gotten involved to be the world's policeman. We should have decided on key allies that were worth defending, Western Europe, Japan being probably the key ones outside the Western Hemisphere. We need to end that. We need to end I think what Trump is campaigning on is ending that, obviously making peace with Russia in Ukraine, pulling out of NATO. He said that multiple times. He said, as president in 2020, he told the president of the European Union that he would not defend Europe if Europe was attacked by Russia. I actually think that's a good thing. They need to provide for their own defense. They're spending like 2%, maybe less, but mainly there's just no threat from Russia except what we've created by fighting them in this proxy war in Ukraine. But we need to defend America. And defending America starts with the border. Stopping the invasion, 10 million illegals in 3 years. How many more illegals are we going to allow? How many of those are terrorists? How many are Iranian terrorist cells? How many are I don't think the Russians really have much, but China, we know that China has 100,000, military age, likely PLA veterans, special forces. So yeah, I think that's really important. The answer is it's not something we can afford to continue. Okay, are we out of
Thank you.
time?
Or did you have something you want?
Yes, sir. Okay.
Yeah. I just it sounds like we need to be prepared to stand up for ourselves.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't look like we have anything that is going to help us.
President Trump's election would help us, but yeah, short of that.
But I mean,
You might be right.
this year is a open opportunity for the world to invade us or do something that would harm us. So
Right.
just based on your expertise, are there things that you can think of that would be helpful for the average person to help our families in preparing ourselves or protecting ourselves? Do you have any ideas?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
3,000 hours. That's what it was built for.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the number one thing is to get right with God. Obviously, turn back to the Savior, Jesus Christ, who's the God of this land. It doesn't matter, what Christian sect you are, what religion you are. I think that's the main answer, because ultimately it's going to come down to protecting our family, and God might withdraw his protecting arm of protection over the United States. The United States might not survive as a country in the next several years, but he can protect our families. He can, those who love him, that try to do his will, and prepare not only spiritually but physically. And that's where Food Storage Depot comes in. Is they can teach you guys what you need to do to survive. I would recommend, again, a 1-year supply of food, at least 2 weeks of water. I have a lot more than that. Relocating near a natural water source. I live by a lake. It's like a couple blocks away. Also, firearms, obviously. Just to protect your family. Hopefully, you never have to use them, but just merely having them, being armed, open carrying perhaps could help deter attackers. Solar generators. I have a solar generator. If it's possible to put solar panels on your house and know how to disconnect them from the power and connect them to your, I'm not really sure how to do that. I'm not an expert on that, but that would obviously be ideal. I've got solar panels in a kind of a separate, solar generator. So I'll kind of all be in the backyard. And then probably one of the biggest ones would be have a bug out plan. So if you live in an urban area or a highly populated suburban area, identify like a cabin, someplace in a rural area, a friend's house, a family's house that you could relocate to when things get scary. And then maybe if nothing, it doesn't go all the way bad, you can come back home. But, I do think, listening to church leaders, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I think we will have some warning for those in and out of it who are members and who aren't members of the church here in this audience. People, if you see the LDS missionaries being called home, that's when I'd start getting worried, because I think that's been prophesied that's going to happen. The Lord's not going to leave the missionaries out away from their families. So that'll give us, some warning time, probably, a few days to 2 weeks. Until then, just get ready. Just generally, and kind of talk to your families. Talk to your families about, what you would do, how you'd want to gather, because obviously you'd want all your kids together, or, parents or whatnot. So yeah, those are some of the suggestions I have.
Well, we have David Pine, who is a friend on the inside. So just email, text Marcelo when you
Okay.
think things are going down.
Okay.
Let us know.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Or if you see China blockade Taiwan and Biden's, sends warships to try to get close to them, I mean, that's obviously going to be the main warning sign,
Okay.
I think.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
What
thank you.
a wonderful presentation. That was amazing. It was wonderful.
It's,
We appreciate you coming, David, taking your time to be here tonight. So
yeah, I love
we
the
all got
opportunity. I appreciate
some great
it.
information. So thank
Thanks
you.
for hosting it.
Appreciate it. I think we're great.